The evening air was still warm when Judge Gilbert Mills turned his key in the lock of his own front door. His leather briefcase sat beside his polished shoes, his suit jacket draped over one arm after 12 exhausting hours presiding over a federal RICO case. He was mentally reviewing tomorrow's docket when he heard the sharp crunch of boots on gravel behind him. Then came the commanding voices that would shatter everything. What unfolded over the next 18 minutes would obliterate 2 law enforcement careers, trigger a Department of Justice investigation that exposed systemic corruption, and demonstrate that even those who interpret the Constitution for a living are not shielded from its most violent violations. The security camera footage and body cam recordings from that Thursday evening would explode across social media with over 31 million views, ignite emergency sessions in the House Judiciary Committee, and lead to the most severe sentences ever handed down for civil rights violations in the county's 140-year history. Judge Gilbert Mills was not a random victim. At 48 years old, he had served 7 years on the federal bench after a presidential appointment that followed 15 years as one of the nation's most decorated federal prosecutors. His career included dismantling organized crime networks, prosecuting public corruption at the highest levels, and authoring landmark opinions on Fourth Amendment protections. His judicial temperament was legendary, fair but uncompromising, respected by defense attorneys and prosecutors alike. He lived modestly in a tree-lined neighborhood where property values reflected decades of professional achievement. He drove a well-maintained sedan, coached youth basketball on weekends, and was recognized by neighbors as the man who shoveled snow for the widow 3 doors down and never missed the neighborhood watch meetings. His front porch had an American flag. His driveway had a "Support Our Schools" sign. None of it mattered. Because on this particular evening, officers Jake Hill and Michael Brown saw only one thing: a black man in an expensive neighborhood, and an opportunity to exercise power without accountability. What they didn't know was that their body cameras were recording. What they couldn't have imagined was that the man they were about to humiliate had spent his entire career studying exactly what they were about to do wrong, and had the institutional power to make sure they paid for every single second of it. Before we continue with this story, write in the comment section where in the world you're watching from, and if you hate seeing people judged before being heard, please subscribe. Gilbert Mills had earned his seat on the federal bench the hard way. Harvard Law Review, clerking for a Supreme Court justice. 15 years in the trenches as a federal prosecutor where he'd built cases that took down 3 crime families, a corrupt state senator, and a pharmaceutical executive who'd knowingly distributed contaminated medication. His appointment to the federal judiciary came with a unanimous Senate confirmation, a rarity in modern politics. In 7 years on the bench, he'd authored 312 opinions. Not one had been overturned on appeal. Today had been particularly brutal. A RICO case involving 14 defendants, testimony that stretched past the normal recess times, and attorneys who tested every boundary of courtroom decorum. Mills had maintained his composure through it all, as he always did. The gray suit he wore, tailored but not ostentatious, had absorbed 12 hours of climate-controlled courtroom air. His burgundy tie was loosened now, the top button of his white shirt undone. His briefcase contained 300 pages of motions he'd review tonight after dinner. He was thinking about those motions when Officer Jake Hill spotted him from the patrol car, rolling slowly down Meadowbrook Drive. Hill had been with the department for 9 years. His record included 87 citizen complaints, though only 2 had resulted in formal reprimands. His partner, Officer Michael Brown, had a cleaner file but had learned early that challenging Hill's decisions meant being frozen out, left without backup, assigned to the worst shifts. So Brown had learned to go along, to stay quiet, to let Hill take the lead. When Hill saw Mills stepping out of his sedan in front of the colonial-style home with the brick walkway and the manicured lawn, something clicked in his mind. A black man. An expensive neighborhood. An opportunity. Hill reached for his radio. His thumb pressed the transmit button. His voice was steady, practiced, deliberately neutral in the way that precinct training taught officers to sound when creating paper trails. Unit 7-3 to dispatch, responding to suspicious activity, 847 Meadowbrook Drive. Black male, 40s, trying door handles. Possible residential burglary in progress, requesting backup. There had been no call, no neighbor complaint, no dispatch assignment. Hill had simply invented a crime, called in his own fabricated emergency, and then put the car in drive. Brown said nothing from the passenger seat. He'd said nothing for years. That silence would cost him 8 years of his freedom. Mills was already at his front door, key in hand, when he heard the tires on his driveway. When he heard the car doors slam. When he heard the boots moving fast across the gravel he'd just had resurfaced last month. He didn't turn around immediately. He thought for just a moment that perhaps they were responding to something on the street, some other house, some actual emergency. Then he heard the voice behind him, sharp with authority and something uglier underneath. "Sir, step away from that door. Keep your hands where I can see them." And Judge Gilbert Mills understood, with the clarity that comes from having prosecuted hundreds of cases just like this one, that he was no longer a federal judge. He was just a black man on a porch, and these officers had already decided who he was. Mills turned slowly, hands visible, palms open. The prosecutor in him was already cataloging violations. The man in him was calculating survival. "Officers, I live here. This is my home." Hill's hand rested on his holster. Brown had positioned himself 3 feet to the left, creating a tactical spread that Mills recognized from his years reviewing use of force cases. They'd done this before, many times. "We need to see identification, now." Mills could have ended it right there. Could have said the words that would have changed everything in an instant. Federal judge, presidential appointee, the man who'd sentenced a police captain to 14 years just last month. But something stopped him. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the part of him that had always wondered what it felt like for the defendants who stood before his bench, powerless and presumed guilty. Maybe it was the security camera he knew was recording everything in perfect 4K resolution, the red recording light visible just above his garage. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he just wanted them to reveal exactly who they were. "My identification is inside my home, which I was entering when you stopped me. On what legal basis am I being detained?" The question hung in the air. Mills watched Hill's jaw tighten, watched Brown shift his weight. They didn't like being questioned. They especially didn't like being questioned with legal precision. "Sir, we received reports of suspicious activity at this address." "What reports? From whom?" "That's not your concern." "Actually, it is. Under Terry v. Ohio, you need reasonable suspicion of criminal activity to detain me. What specific articulable facts led you to believe I was engaged in criminal conduct?" Hill took a step closer. Mills could smell the coffee on his breath, see the tiny camera clipped to his uniform recording everything. Good. Let it record. "You want to play lawyer? You can do that at the station. Right now, you're interfering with an investigation." "I haven't interfered with anything. I've asked legitimate questions about why I'm being prevented from entering my own home." Mills kept his voice level, almost professorial, every word deliberate, every sentence a building block in whatever case would follow, because he knew now, with absolute certainty, that there would be a case. These officers had crossed a line the moment they fabricated that radio call. Everything after was just evidence. His keys were still in the lock, his briefcase still on the welcome mat. Through the front window he could see his living room, the photographs on the mantel, the law books lining the shelves. His life, visible but unreachable, separated from him by 2 men with badges and all the wrong assumptions. "Step away from the door," Hill repeated. Keep your hands where we can see them. We're going to need to verify your identity. I've told you who I am, and we'll verify that after we check the residence. There it was. They wanted inside. Wanted to search his home without consent, without a warrant, without any legal authority whatsoever. Mills felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, exactly. Something harder, more purposeful. Officers, I do not consent to any search of my property. Hill smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Sir, we're not asking for your consent. And that's when Mills knew he'd let them walk far enough down this path. That's when he knew the next 18 minutes would cost them everything. Mills reached for his keys, still dangling in the lock. He'd turned them halfway before Hill's hand clamped down on his wrist. I said step back. The grip was tight enough to leave marks. Mills would photograph those marks 3 hours later at the FBI field office, along with everything else. But in this moment, he simply looked down at the hand on his wrist, then up at Hill's face. You're physically restraining me from entering my own home. We're securing the scene. Hill's voice had changed, harder now, the pretense of professionalism cracking. Until we verify your story. My story. Mills repeated the words slowly. You can verify it right now. Look through the window. There's mail on the side table. My name is on every envelope. Judge Gilbert Mills, 847 Meadowbrook Drive. Brown moved to the window, cupping his hands against the glass. Mills watched him scan the interior, saw his eyes land on the envelopes, the framed diploma from Harvard Law, the photographs. Brown's expression shifted. Something flickered there, maybe doubt, maybe recognition that they'd made a mistake. But when he turned back to Hill, he said nothing, just gave a small shake of his head that could have meant anything or nothing. Hill released Mills' wrist but moved his body between Mills and the door. A human barrier, an invisible wall constructed of authority and assumption, and 9 years of getting away with exactly this. Mail doesn't prove anything. Anyone could put mail in a house. While actively burglarizing it? Mills kept his voice even, but something was building in his chest, not panic, rage. Cold and controlled and getting colder. You think burglars stop to sort the mail? I think we need to see identification, and we need to clear the interior. For officer safety. Officer safety. The magic words that had justified 1,000 illegal searches, 10,000 violated rights. Mills had heard that phrase in courtrooms for 2 decades, had ruled on it, written opinions about it, understood its legitimate applications. This wasn't one of them. You have no exigent circumstances, no consent, no warrant. If you enter my home, you'll be committing a federal crime. Hill stepped closer, close enough that Mills could see the small scar above his left eyebrow, the slight asymmetry of his jaw. Close enough to be a threat. You threatening a police officer? I'm informing you of the law. You some kind of lawyer? Mills almost laughed. Almost. Something like that. Brown had moved to Mills' car now, shining his flashlight through the windows. Looking for what? Weapons? Drugs? Evidence of anything that might justify what they were doing? Mills watched him try the door handle. Locked. Good. Registration and insurance in the glove box, Mills said. Also with my name on them. Hill pulled out his radio. Dispatch, run a 28 on Gilbert Mills. MILLS, 847 Meadowbrook. They were running him through the system, looking for warrants, prior arrests, anything that would validate their suspicions. They'd find nothing. Parking tickets paid on time. A spotless record that went back 30 years. But the search itself was another violation. Another brick in the case Mills was building in his mind. The radio crackled. The dispatcher's voice came back. No wants or warrants. Address confirmed to that name. No priors. Hill's face hardened. He'd wanted something different, needed something different. We still need to verify identity. And there it was. The moment when facts stopped mattering. When reality became negotiable. When two officers decided that a black man couldn't possibly belong in his own home, no matter what the evidence said. What happened next would be dissected frame by frame in a federal courtroom. Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Huang would call it a masterclass in psychological torture. The body camera footage would run continuously, timestamp visible in the corner, documenting every second. 6:51 p.m. Hill reached for Mills' briefcase. I need to see what's in here. That's my personal property. You have no legal authority. Hill was already unzipping it, pulling out the folders, the legal pads covered in Mills' handwriting, the protein bar he'd never had time to eat, papers scattered across the welcome mat, a lifetime of professional discretion violated in seconds. What's all this? You really a lawyer? Those are confidential court documents. Hill laughed. Actually laughed. Sure they are. And I'm the president. Brown had moved to Mills' car again, this time opening the door. Mills heard the locks disengage. He'd never locked it manually, must have been the key fob in his pocket. Brown was searching the interior now, rifling through the glove compartment, checking under the seats. You do not have consent to search my vehicle. No response. Just the sound of Brown's hands moving through Mills' private space, violating every boundary that separated citizen from state. 6:54 p.m. Hill was reading through Mills' case notes now, reading confidential legal strategies, privileged communications, the private thoughts of a federal judge reviewing a complex criminal case. Each page he touched was another felony. Mills counted them. Evidence. Lot of big words here. You steal this briefcase from someone? The implication landed like a slap. A black man couldn't possibly generate this kind of work. Must have stolen it. Must be impersonating someone. Must be anything other than what he claimed to be. Mills said nothing. His silence was strategic now, deliberate. Let them talk. Let them reveal themselves. 6:58 p.m. Hill pulled out his phone, took photos of Mills' case notes, taking pictures of sealed federal court documents, creating copies he had no authority to possess. The federal prosecutor would later add 18 counts of unauthorized access to government materials. You know what I think? Hill stepped closer again, voice dropping to something more intimate, more dangerous. I think you're in the wrong neighborhood. I think maybe you should find somewhere more appropriate. There it was, the coded language, the unspoken message delivered in tone and implication. This neighborhood wasn't for people who looked like Mills. Didn't matter what he owned, what he'd achieved, what he'd earned. His presence itself was a crime. 7:02 p.m. Brown emerged from the car holding Mills' vehicle registration, read the name aloud. Gilbert Mills, 847 Meadowbrook. Looked at Hill, said nothing else. Hill crumpled the registration, tossed it on the ground. Registration can be forged. Mills watched the document, his document, proving his ownership, confirming his identity, discarded like trash on his own property. Watched Brown's face, looking for any sign of resistance, any hint that he might push back against Hill's escalating irrationality. Nothing. Just compliance. Just silence. 7:05 p.m. Hill was in his face now, close enough that Mills could count the coffee stains on his collar. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell us the truth about why you're really here, or we're going to find out the hard way. The threat was clear, unambiguous, and completely illegal. Mills met his eyes, held his gaze, and made his decision. I think it's time I showed you something. He reached slowly into his briefcase, into the inner pocket Hill hadn't searched. His fingers closed around the leather credential case, the one with the gold federal seal embossed on the front. The 18 minutes were about to end, but the consequences were just beginning. 7:05:33 p.m. The timestamp would become famous. Legal scholars would reference it. Police training academies would show the footage, pausing at this exact second. The moment before, the moment after, the precise instant when hubris met accountability. Mills opened the leather case slowly, deliberately. The security camera captured it all in perfect clarity. The gold federal seal catching the porch light, the embossed letters, the official photograph. His photograph. He placed it carefully on the hood of the patrol car, positioned it so both officers could see, so both body cameras would capture it, so there would be no ambiguity, no confusion, no possible misunderstanding about what they'd just done. I'm Federal District Court Judge Gilbert Mills. I was appointed by the President of the United States. I preside over the federal courthouse downtown, where I've served for the past 7 years. This is my home. You've detained me illegally, searched my property without consent or warrant, and violated my civil rights under color of law. The words came out steady, professional. Each syllable a nail in a coffin they'd built themselves. Hill stared at the credentials. Mills watched the color drain from his face, watched understanding dawn in terrible slow motion, watched a man realize he'd just destroyed his own life. Brown had gone completely still, frozen, his hand hovering near his radio like he was considering calling for help, calling for a supervisor, calling for anyone who might be able to undo what couldn't be undone. For 5 seconds, nobody spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the security camera, the distant bark of a dog 3 houses down, the rustle of wind through the oak trees that lined Meadowbrook Drive. Then Hill reached for the credentials. Mills's hand came down on top of them first. "Don't touch them. You've contaminated enough of my property tonight." "Judge Mills, Hill's voice had changed completely. The authority was gone. The swagger evaporated. What remained was panic, thin and desperate. "We had a report of suspicious activity. We were just responding to—" "You fabricated that report. I heard your radio transmission. Unit 7-3 to dispatch. There was no call, no complaint. You invented a crime because you saw a black man in a neighborhood you didn't think he belonged in. That's not— We were just— You detained me without reasonable suspicion. You physically restrained me from entering my own home. You searched my briefcase containing sealed federal court documents. You searched my vehicle without consent. You photographed confidential legal materials. You refused to accept multiple forms of evidence proving my identity and residence." Mills picked up his credentials, returned them to his briefcase. His hands were steady. Inside, he was shaking, but they didn't need to see that. They didn't deserve to see that. "And now you're going to leave my property. Both of you. Immediately." Hill opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Sir, I apologize. We made a mistake. If we could just—" "Officer Hill, I'm giving you a direct order to leave, now." Brown was already backing toward the patrol car. He understood. Some part of him had probably understood from the moment they'd gotten dispatch confirmation, but he'd stayed silent. That silence was going to cost him 8 years. Hill lingered one more second as if there might be something he could say, some combination of words that might make this better. But Mill's expression made it clear. There was nothing. No apology sufficient. No explanation acceptable. 7:08:15 p.m. The officers retreated to their vehicle. Mills stood on his porch and watched them drive away, their taillights disappearing into the dusk. Then he walked inside his home, locked the door behind him, and picked up his phone. The federal case began with a single call to a number most citizens never have reason to dial. FBI Civil Rights Division. Special Agent Vincent Delacroix answered on the second ring. Mills was reaching for his door handle when he heard Hill's boots on the porch steps again. Fast, urgent. The body camera was still recording, the security camera still watching, every second still being documented in crystalline detail. "Judge Mills, wait!" Mills turned. Hill was coming toward him, but his eyes weren't on Mills. They were locked on the security camera mounted above the garage, the small device with its blinking red light that had captured everything. "That camera," Hill said. "Does it record?" Mills felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Yes. We need that footage." "No, you don't." Hill's hand was already reaching up, fingers stretching toward the camera. Mills stepped between him and the device. "Officer Hill, you need to leave. Now." "That footage, it doesn't show the full context. It could be misinterpreted." "The context," Mills said slowly, "is that you illegally detained me, searched my property without cause, and violated my civil rights. The footage shows exactly what happened." Brown had gotten out of the patrol car now, moving back toward the porch. His face was pale, his movements jerky with panic. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "Look, Judge, this got out of hand. We made a mistake, but there's no reason this has to go any further. No one needs to know about this." There it was. The cover-up. The conspiracy. The moment when a civil rights violation became obstruction of justice. Mills looked at Brown, this younger officer who'd stood silent through 18 minutes of abuse, who'd watched his partner fabricate evidence and destroy property and violate every principle they'd sworn to uphold, and now wanted Mills to be complicit in hiding it. "You're asking me to suppress evidence of a federal crime. We're asking you to be reasonable." Hill again, voice tight with desperation. "You're a judge. You understand how things work, how one mistake can ruin careers. We have families, You should have thought about that before you decided I was suspicious for unlocking my own front door." Hill took a step closer, then another. His hand moved toward Mills' arm, and Mills saw it clearly now. The calculation, the decision to physically intimidate a federal judge on his own property, even after being exposed. Some men couldn't stop digging even when they'd reached bedrock. "Judge Mills, I need you to understand something. That footage could cause a lot of problems. For everyone. Maybe we can work this out between us. Professional courtesy, cop to cop." "I'm not a cop. I'm the person you violated." Brown pulled out his phone, started recording. "Judge Mills is being verbally aggressive and refusing to cooperate with our investigation." Mills almost laughed. They were creating a counter-narrative, documenting their own false version of events, except they were doing it on camera, on recording, with their body cameras still running. They were so panicked they couldn't think straight. "Officers, every word you're saying is being recorded, by your cameras and mine. You're compounding your violations with obstruction, conspiracy, and attempted intimidation of a federal official." Hill's face went from pale to red. Rage replacing panic. "Listen to me." "No, you listen to me. Get off my property, both of you, right now, before you add federal witness tampering to your charges." The word charges seemed to penetrate. Hill stopped moving. Brown lowered his phone. "We could lose everything," Brown whispered. "Yes," Mills said. "You could. You should. You will." For a moment, Hill looked like he might try something physical. His hands clenched, his jaw worked. But then something in Mills' expression, the absolute certainty of a man who'd sent harder men to harder places, made him reconsider. They left. Finally. Completely. Mills waited until the patrol car disappeared. Then he walked inside, closed the door, and made the call that would dismantle their lives. Special Agent Delacroix answered on the second ring. Mills' first words were precise. "I need to report a federal civil rights violation and attempted obstruction of justice. I'm a sitting federal judge, and 2 police officers just tried to coerce me into destroying evidence." The machinery of federal prosecution woke up, and it was hungry. 7:47 p.m. Special Agent Vincent Delacroix listened without interrupting. He'd been with the FBI's Civil Rights Division for 12 years, had investigated police departments from Baltimore to Los Angeles, had seen footage that made seasoned prosecutors physically ill. But a sitting federal judge targeted on his own property, that was a first. Judge Mills, I need you to preserve all footage. Don't touch the security system. Don't download anything. We'll need the original files with metadata intact. Already done. The system automatically uploads to cloud storage encrypted. Time-stamped. Unalterable. Of course it does. Delacroix almost smiled. A federal judge knew how to build an evidence chain. I'm sending a team to your residence within the hour. We'll need your statement, photographs of any injuries, and access to your security system. The officers also have body camera footage. They tried to delete it during the cover-up attempt. Delacroix's pen stopped moving. They what? Officer Hill reached for my security camera. Both officers explicitly asked me to suppress evidence and suggested, no one needs to know. All captured on both their cameras and mine. There was a long pause. Then Delacroix's voice came back harder. Judge Mills, I'm going to be very frank with you. What you're describing isn't just a civil rights violation. It's a conspiracy to obstruct justice involving federal officials. These officers are looking at serious federal time. I know. I've sentenced people for less. By 8:30 p.m., 2 FBI agents were in Mills's living room, photographing the bruising on his wrist where Hill had grabbed him, documenting the scattered contents of his briefcase, recording every detail of the scene. By 9:15 p.m., they'd seized the security system's hard drive and downloaded 18 minutes and 42 seconds of footage that would change everything. By 10:30 p.m., a federal magistrate judge, Judge Helen Kowalski, who'd known Mills for 6 years, signed a warrant for the body camera footage and personnel files of officers Jake Hill and Meikle Brown. She read the affidavit twice, her expression growing darker with each page. Gil, she said quietly after signing, I'm sorry this happened to you. Mills had simply nodded. What else was there to say? By 11:45 p.m., Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Huang was sitting in her office, third cup of coffee in hand, watching the footage for the first time. Delacroix sat across from her, watching her face instead of the screen. He'd already seen it twice. He knew what was coming. The timestamp rolled. 6:47 p.m., Mills turning his key, the boots on gravel, the confrontation beginning. Huang watched without speaking through the illegal detention, the briefcase search, the vehicle search. Watched Hill photograph confidential court documents. Watched Brown crumple the registration and discard it. Watched 18 minutes of constitutional violations stacking like cordwood. Then came the credential reveal at 7:05:33 p.m., the color draining from Hill's face, the panic setting in, then the cover-up attempt. No one needs to know, Hill reaching for the camera, the explicit conspiracy captured in perfect audio. When the footage ended, Huang sat back in her chair. She was 43 years old, had prosecuted corruption cases that sent senators to prison, had built RICO cases against organized crime families. She'd seen a lot. But this was something else. This is the clearest civil rights violation I've encountered in 19 years of prosecution, she said finally. They documented their own crimes, multiple angles, perfect audio, and then they tried to cover it up on camera. It gets worse, Delacroix said. How could it possibly? We pulled their personnel files an hour ago. Hill has 87 citizen complaints. Brown has 31. The department never sustained any of them. We think there's a pattern. Huang looked at him. How many victims? We don't know yet, but if I had to guess, dozens, maybe more. Huang opened her laptop, started typing. We're opening a pattern and practice investigation. Full civil rights review of the entire department. I want every complaint, every use of force report, every body camera file from the last 5 years. That's going to take months. Then we'd better start now. She looked back at the frozen image on her screen. Mills standing on his own porch, locked out of his own home, his judicial authority meaningless against 2 badges and a lie. Because if they did this to a federal judge, imagine what they've done to everyone else. By midnight, the federal case was official. By 1 a.m., Hill and Brown were being informed by their watch commander that they were suspended pending investigation. By 2 a.m., both officers had retained criminal defense attorneys. By dawn, the machinery of federal justice was running at full speed, and nothing was going to stop it. The first call came 3 days after the story broke. Dr. Marcus Thornton, a dental surgeon who lived 2 miles from Mills, saw the news coverage and felt something break open inside him. He'd kept quiet for 2 years, told himself it was just a misunderstanding, tried to forget. But he hadn't forgotten, couldn't forget. He'd been pulling into his own driveway after a 15-hour oral surgery when Officer Hill had blocked him in with the patrol car. Demanded ID, demanded proof of residence, refused to believe the registration, the insurance card, the mail visible through his car window. Hill had detained him for 40 minutes in his own driveway while neighbors watched from windows, while his wife stood on the porch crying, while his children hid inside wondering if their father was going to jail. No arrest, no charges. Just 40 minutes of humiliation and a warning to be more careful about where he was parking. Dr. Thornton had filed a complaint. The department had marked it unfounded and closed the case within a week. He called the FBI hotline that had been set up specifically for the Mills investigation. Special Agent Delacroix took his statement personally. 3 hours of detailed testimony. Dates, times, witnesses, everything. "We believe you, Dr. Thornton," Delacroix said when they finished. "And you're not alone." He wasn't. The calls came in waves after that. 37 victims over 4 years, each with their own story, each with the same officers, each with the same pattern of targeting and abuse. Kenneth Washington, a bank executive, had been handcuffed while taking his trash cans to the curb. 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, in his bathrobe and slippers. Officer Hill had claimed he matched the description of a burglary suspect. Vague description, no actual burglary. Charges dropped after 2 hours at the station. Washington had hired an attorney, filed a lawsuit. The city had settled for $12,000 and sealed the records. Angela Price, a retired high school teacher, had been arrested for prowling while gardening in her own front yard. Officer Brown had driven past, circled back, demanded identification. When she'd gone inside to retrieve it, he'd followed her onto her property, into her home, without permission or warrant, arrested her for obstructing an investigation. The charges were dismissed the next day. She'd filed a complaint. It was marked unsubstantiated. Lawrence Bennett, a software engineer, had been stopped while jogging through his neighborhood, detained for 20 minutes, asked repeatedly what he was really doing there. Officer Hill had run his name 4 times, searching for warrants, priors, anything. Found nothing. Let him go with a warning about suspicious behavior. Each victim black, each victim professional, each victim in a neighborhood that Officers Hill and Brown had apparently decided needed protection from its own residents. The FBI built a database. 37 documented incidents, 87 total complaints against Hill, 31 against Brown. 0 sustained, 0 disciplinary actions. A department that had looked at years of evidence and chosen to see nothing. Rebecca Huang reviewed every file, every statement, every piece of evidence. She saw the pattern emerge with brutal clarity. This wasn't about 2 rogue officers. This was about a system that had enabled them, protected them, and allowed them to operate with impunity for nearly a decade. She called a meeting with her team. 15 prosecutors, 20 FBI agents, mountains of evidence spread across conference tables. "We're not just prosecuting Hill and Brown," she told them. "We're prosecuting a culture, and we're going to document every single failure that allowed this to continue." The investigation expanded. Personnel files, training records, complaint procedures, supervisory reviews. The entire apparatus of the police department laid bare under federal scrutiny. What they found was damning. Complaints routed to supervisors who were personal friends of the accused officers. Investigation files that contained nothing but the officers' own statements. Victims who'd been discouraged from filing formal complaints, told it would be their word against a police officer's, warned that filing false reports was a crime. A machine designed not to find truth, but to bury it. Mills watched it unfold from his chambers, presiding over other cases while his own case dismantled an institution. Other victims called him, thanked him, told him their stories. He listened to everyone, carried every story with him. 37 victims, 37 lives disrupted, 37 violations of dignity and rights and the basic promise that in America, your home is your castle. The pattern was clear, the evidence overwhelming, and the reckoning was coming. The trial lasted 4 days. It could have lasted an hour. Rebecca Huang's opening statement was surgical. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you're going to watch 2 police officers destroy their own careers in real time, in high definition, with perfect audio. You're going to watch them violate the Constitution, then try to cover it up. And you're going to wonder, as I did, how many others there were before someone finally had the power to stop them. The defense attorneys, expensive ones, paid for by the police union, tried everything. They argued context. They argued officer safety. They argued split-second decisions and reasonable mistakes. But there was no arguing with 18 minutes of footage played on courthouse monitors for a packed gallery to witness. The jury watched Mills being detained at his own door, watched his briefcase violated, his privacy shredded, his dignity stripped. Watched Hill photograph confidential court documents, watched Brown crumple the registration and toss it aside like trash. Watched the cover-up attempt, the desperate conspiracy captured in crystal clarity. Dr. Thornton testified. Kenneth Washington testified. Angela Price testified. Lawrence Bennett testified. 37 victims, though only 12 took the stand. Each one telling the same story with different details. Each one describing the same officers using the same tactics. Each one explaining how they'd filed complaints that disappeared into administrative black holes. The defense called character witnesses, fellow officers who swore Hill and Brown were good men, dedicated professionals, victims of a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But Huang's cross-examination was devastating. Officer Rodriguez, you're aware that Officer Hill has 87 citizen complaints in his file? Yes, but... And how many were sustained? None, but that doesn't mean... It means your department looked at 87 complaints and decided they were all lying, every single one, including a federal judge. The jury deliberated 97 minutes, guilty on all counts, civil rights violations, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, deprivation of rights under color of law. In the gallery, Mills sat perfectly still. He'd sentenced hundreds of defendants from his bench. He'd never imagined sitting in the audience while his own violation was vindicated. When the verdict was read, he closed his eyes briefly. Justice. Finally. Sentencing day arrived 6 weeks later. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow watching from monitors in adjacent rooms. Judge Helen Kowalski presided. She'd known both defendants professionally for years. What she had to say was measured and merciless. Officers Hill and Brown, you violated your oaths, betrayed your badges, and weaponized your authority against the very citizens you swore to protect. You targeted successful black residents because their presence in affluent neighborhoods offended your prejudices. When caught, you compounded your crimes with obstruction and conspiracy. You have shown no genuine remorse, only regret at being held accountable. Jake Hill, 10 years in federal prison. Michael Brown, 8 years in federal prison. Both men were remanded into custody immediately. No bail pending appeal. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered. Some wept. Mills remained silent, watching two men in handcuffs being led away by federal marshals. Outside the courthouse, Mills delivered a statement to the dozens of cameras waiting. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice delivered, even late, can transform everything. Today's sentences send a message that badge or no badge, the Constitution protects every citizen at every doorstep. My hope is that this case becomes a catalyst for the systemic change that 37 victims deserved years ago. The clip played on every news network, trended on social media for 3 days, was quoted in editorials nationwide. The city council met in emergency session. Faced with federal liability for a pattern of civil rights violations, they voted to settle. $9.5 million to Judge Mills. $41 million distributed among the other 37 victims. Total payout, $50.5 million. The city's insurance couldn't cover it. Property taxes would rise for 5 years to pay the debt. The Department of Justice imposed a consent decree. Federal monitors would oversee the police department for 10 years. Every policy, every procedure, every training protocol subject to federal approval. The chief of police resigned. 4 supervisors were terminated. The entire command structure rebuilt from scratch. Mills was invited to chair the newly created National Judicial Council on Police Accountability, a federal task force charged with developing nationwide standards for police conduct and civilian oversight. He accepted. And the security footage, all 18 minutes and 42 seconds of it, became required viewing in police academies across 17 states. Cadets watched it in silence, watched a federal judge treated like a criminal at his own door. Watched 2 careers end in real time. Watched what happens when power meets prejudice and someone finally has the authority to demand accountability. The final frame of the footage, frozen on training room screens from California to New York, shows the timestamp, 7:05:33 p.m. The moment before the credentials were revealed. The last second before everything changed. A permanent reminder that the Constitution isn't just a document. It's a promise. And that promise applies to every citizen at every doorstep, regardless of who's watching, even when, especially when, no one thinks they are.